Welcome to the N2 Novus Knowledge Agronomy Podcast, your go-to resource for agronomic insights, technology solutions, and ongoing education. At N2, we combine agronomic expertise from soil analysis to best practice application methodologies to provide a holistic view for your yield optimization. Our focus is on practical strategies that improve efficiency and drive better results in the field. Join us for interesting discussions, expert advice, and the latest advancements shaping modern agriculture. Whether you're in the field, on the road, or at your facility, we're here to keep you informed ahead of the curve. Welcome to the N2 podcast. Today, joined by my counterparts, Rodney Phelps in Illinois and Derek Cottrill in Northwest Missouri. How are you guys doing?
Morning, Nick.
Doing good.
Well, guys, I don't know if we want to start with just kind of a quick update, what's going on, activity, where we're at. I'll start with you, Rodney, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so we're corn crops moving along probably faster than we like just due to the heat. We're in that R5 stage dent and moving grain fill, like I say, a little faster than I want, but Mother Nature's in charge. Soybean crop still we're in that R5, late 4-5 stage, growing well. Our weed control is still holding. Weeds aren't waving at us above the canopy yet. We know it will be, but we're not there. We did get a little more rain last night. Both crops are doing well. We're fast paced towards harvest.
Thanks, Rodney. You're in the garden spot of all places. And Derek, what about you?
We're pretty similar to Rodney with corn and into dent pretty well. A lot of it pretty well into R5 stage. Soybeans again similar to Rodney. We got a lot getting into that R5 stage. Maybe some later planted stuff into R4. Where we're still making some management decisions and applications in beans, but even those are wrapping up. But corn, for the most part, is pretty well wrapped up at this point too, slowing down. And like Rodney said, now we're kind of hitting that window where we're just waiting for things to dry down and get ready for harvest at this point.
Appreciate it, guys. Kind of like normal, just with the wide planting season that I had, that we're a little more spread out than you guys. But corn, yeah, most of it's at the R5 stage, but there's some of the later corn that's still R4. Soybeans, a little probably more variability, where our earlier planted stuff is R5, but we've got some of the later planted stuff that's R4, and honestly even earlier in some places. With that said, I just wanted to get into a few topics with you guys, talking just a little bit about corn and soybean growth and development. We kind of mentioned what stages we're at, but maybe what does that look like? What's going on within the plant? And then that will lead us right into fungicide applications. Kind of really the question at this stage is just how late is too late? And that's honestly for both crops kind of been a big question lately. And then I just want to hit on a couple things, late season yellowing that we're seeing in corn and soybeans, and maybe what's going on. And that might be bigger in my geography than your guys's, but I think it's worth covering. So, Rodney, maybe if you want to start us out on corn and kind of where we're at, growth and development wise, what's going on, and then how does that come into implication with some of the southern rust moving in?
Yeah, so the big $100 million question right now is there's late disease, southern rust. There has been some northern corn leaf blight, saw it, gray leaf, tar spot. I mean, hell, I could go down the whole list of disease because of all the humidity we had. The corn crop, and I'm going to talk for my area, is in the R5, which is dent. And on a normal year, you've got about 4 weeks in that R5 stage headed to maturity, to where the milk line is going to start moving on the corn, on the kernel. And you get to about R5.5, you've got a half milk line. And the reason I'm bringing all that up is now that we've had some southern rust blow in late, tar spots coming in late, gray leaf has never stopped. With some northern corn leaf blight. The big question is it too late to spray fungicide? And there's some other questions I would ask in that question is a couple things of how in the R stage, how early in the dent is the crop. If it's just entering the R5 stage, just in dent, and it's a field that's got is high productivity, it's a good crop, it's a good hybrid, it's you're looking at it that's going to be a bell ringer for you. You probably can spray a fungicide and see a return. Now, I'm going to say that tongue in cheek because all university data that you can put your hands on, don't care what university you want to use, pick your favorite one. They have all done enough research and testing that after R5, there's not a economic return 9 times out of 10 on applying fungicide at that timing on that crop. Now, that's on the yield side of things. I also have customers that want to watch standability, harvestability for this crop. If you've got a hybrid that is got some late disease coming in it, it may be a known hybrid that maybe standability sometimes can be an issue. We've still got a long ways to harvest. It may be such a thing that a fungicide application for harvestability might be warranted at this time. That would be a conversation that I'd want to have with my seedsman on the variety that your hybrid you're talking about, as if you feel that that's needed on that. The other thing I'm noticing on some hybrids too was after we came out of the rapid growth syndrome, the corn up here anyway got 1 to 2 feet taller than normal. So we're dealing with a tall plant. We're also dealing with ear placement that's 1 node higher than normal. And so where I'm leading you that is we think of the physics on a corn plant with high ear placement and a tall plant, it's like a leaning tower, and you've got weight at a high placement on that plant, it could topple over easier. I don't want to, I'm not sounding the warning bell, but I'm also sounding that you need to take a look at your crop and see, how standability, do the stalk break test, just check it out. But at this point, if crops in R5 and cranking, probably fungicide application for an economic return is not there.
Those are good points, Rodney, and I think that's what I would come back to is just what you said. You look at all the university data out there, and most all of those experts are going to recommend R4 being the last stage, dose stage, to apply a fungicide and get economic return, and then we cross into R5, and it may be a hope and a prayer. To your point, though, I mean, I've seen instances in the past where people have done it and gotten some return out of it, but I think Derek, we were discussing earlier that maybe the consistency of that return is probably not going to be there. It might be up and down. One guy might see a response, the next guy might not. I guess at R5, the other thing I just mentioned, Rodney was talking about some of the things happening there. Is just mentioned too. Right as you cross into R5, I mean, you still have over half that kernel weight, dry weight to put on. Now we get into R5 and a half milk line, and then we got 90% of that dry weight is made, so there's only 10% to go. So it also, to Rodney's point, depends on what part of R5 you're at, how much potential yield and kernel dry weight depth is left to be put on there. But I think really good points there, Derek, or really good points there, Rodney. Let's switch over to Derek, just to soybeans. I don't know if you want to mention kind of where we're at and then how late's too late on fungicide apps on beans.
Yeah. So all three of us talked. We got soybeans in R5. Rodney and I probably have the majority of that, but there's still some later planted stuff at R4. And like you alluded to, Nick, I wouldn't doubt if you couldn't find some beans out there still in R3. And so R5, our furthest along beans. So R5 is when we have an 1/8 inch pod in the upper 4 nodes. That's how you can tell whether or not you're in R4, or excuse me, R5. R4 would be a 3/4 inch pod in the upper 4 nodes type deal. But R5, what's going on there, and what happens between R4 and R5 is that's when our soybeans lose the ability to compensate. And by that I mean they quit putting on new flowers and new pods. So it is true that by R5, a lot of yield has been determined in those beans in terms of our nodes per acre and therefore pods per acre and even seeds per acre to an extent has been set since our pod number's been set. But what is still going on in those soybeans is still a lot of yield determination in terms of test weight. So at R5, the soybeans start switching gears and focusing on filling seed. Test weight and things like that can still be significantly impacted at that stage. And I think we talked in a previous podcast on fungicide timing in beans. We always talk about being proactive with all our fungicides, and that is true. But to where in soybeans, that application isn't quite as disease driven. I tend to favor in most cases that late R3, even full R4 type application in a fungicide in beans. That's kind of my key timing is that R4 timing. And so now we're into R5. So are we past our point of our typical peak return? Possibly, since a lot of yield has been determined. But since we can no longer compensate for stress and we're still trying to fill that seed, I do think soybeans can still at R5 still be very sensitive to stress, whether that be from insects. So I think insecticide is still going to be could still be important, but also late season disease and we talk about a lot of times our stock strength in corn. Well, beans have the ability to lodge and things like that too. If we got a taller standing hybrid and things like that, and so there's still a lot to protect in soybeans, and I believe in especially in a higher yielding scenario, we start talking 75, 80 plus bushel beans. If we haven't protected it with a fungicide or an insecticide at this point, and you're into R5, I think we still, if the field is clean and weed free, like Rodney was talking about. I still think we can justify an application on soybeans at this point at R5. And I would bet there's still plenty in R4. And like Nick said, those even later planted beans that might be late R3, early R4. I think we still have an opportunity there if you haven't got anything on at this point. But that's kind of where we're at.
Comment I'll
Derek,
make on soybeans too is our goal on a soybean is to keep it from senescing. We want it to stay green as long as we can. And so a late fungicide application, I've seen it in the past, will hold your senesce off and put the weight in the bean like Derek was saying. Soybeans, it doesn't take much weight per seed on soybeans to add yield. And so, we're not advocating spend more money on the crop, but what we are advocating is a healthy crop all the way to the end. And just as we were saying, there's all the disease in corn. There's also, when you part the canopy in the soybeans, there's a lot going on that the eye can't see at 55 mile an hour that we want to protect too.
yeah, good points, guys, and Derek, I think you nailed it. Which is R5 might not be ideal, but if you've waited that long to make an application, I agree with you. I think it's still worth it. Seen a lot of benefit from the insecticide alone at that application. So yeah, I think we can still get a lot of good.
And I will correct myself though. I think I said you mark R5 with a 1/8 inch pod in the upper four nodes. That's an 1/8 inch. There's seeds. You should have seeds developing that are at least an 1/8 inch long inside the pod in the upper four nodes. So I will correct myself there on the staging part.
Good catch. Um, last thing, I guess, last topic I wanted to hit on, and you guys jump in where you want to here. And it might be more my geography, but I've noticed the last few days, you're seeing a lot more yellowing in both crops, corn and soybeans, both. Corn, you can see fields with nitrogen deficiency showing up. Guys that maybe didn't either have the best plan or didn't top dress, or maybe they put on their anhydrous in the fall and then didn't plant until we got to late May. Just a big gap there. But for whatever the reason, we had some pretty heavy rains there in July, and when soil temperatures are really warm and we get heavy rainfall, we can flush a lot of nitrogen. And I think we're starting to see the impact of that now. You can see some fields that are still dark green all the way out to the edge. You can see other fields that are starting to show some significant firing, significant yellowing. And so I do think for us, nitrogen deficiency is going to be a big thing from field to field or manager to manager. You're going to see some differences there. That's going to show up for sure when we tend to see get later in the season, it seems like in years where we have N deficiency, that's when that seed starts really demanding a lot of that nitrogen. That's when it really starts to rear its ugly head, in my opinion. So we're starting to see that. The other thing on corn, I've kind of noticed, and I'll be honest, I've been gone on vacation last week, so I haven't investigated a lot. But driving down the road, you see a lot of what looks like top dieback starting, or it could be crown rot starting on this corn, and it shouldn't really be a surprise to us. As much wet stress as we've had, and then you add the heat stress here at the end, some of those crown rods or that top dieback can take over, and you can see the effects of that with that yellowing in the upper part of the plant. And so that would be something else to be mindful of. Just another one of those yield robbing things. And a lot of those, when it comes to crown rods, the infection happens through the root system. We just get that really wet weather early, gets the infection. We get a stress later, which i.e. like the heat Rodney was alluding to. That can be enough to take that crop over. The other one I do want to point out would be on the soybean side. So been seeing a lot of yellow spots showing up in soybean fields. You can tell in like go through some of the bottom fields, you can see where some of the ditches run through the field and those spots are yellow. You'd expect that. It's been waterlogged, likely nitrogen deficient. But you can also now see on some of those eroded hillsides yellowing showing up in the soybeans. And that is likely sulfur deficiency. Probably if you take a tissue sample, you'll see nitrogen and sulfur deficiency together. But I think we are seeing a fair amount of sulfur deficiency out there this year in soybeans that we did not see last year. And I think you'll notice some fields in the same area that got yellow spots on those red hillsides, and you'll look at another field and it's totally green. And I would venture to guess there's probably some difference in fertility management there. And I think this year might be a year where we see a big response to sulfur and soybeans and corn as well. But we have a lot more guys doing it in corn and less in soybeans. So just a couple things I guess I wanted to point out and be mindful of. I don't know if you guys have any points you want to add to that.
I'll go back to corn on the fungicide question. Another thing to remember, once that crop um, hits black layer, then it's going to start pulling moisture to dry. And so I look at the stalk of a corn plant as a two-way highway, and the xylem and phloem. And so we want to keep that highway open as best we can so that it dries down naturally, and it's not the old adage, die and dry. And so that's something else to talk to the seedsman about, is how critical a given hybrid is. And so all of you listening, that ask your grower a lot of these questions, because there still might be opportunity on that fungicide pass to help for natural dry down and standability to get you into harvest and have the crop dry naturally.
Yeah, great points, Rodney. The other thing I might add on soybeans that just came to my mind, but the SDS bomb has kind of gone off in our geography, and there is a fair amount of SDS showing up. It should not be a major surprise with all the heavy rains that we've had early on to get that infection. It seems to be a little more localized in areas where guys were utilizing a good seed treatment against it, like Levo or Soltro. But it's even still out there in those fields. And obviously variety comes into play, but planting date when we got that heavy rain, and then just the amount of moisture we've had as we've switched into reproductive here, it's really pulling that toxin up. And I shouldn't be one to jump to conclusions, because SDS symptoms, foliar look like red crown rot symptoms, look like brown stem rot, but everything I've seen so far in my geography appears to be SDS.
There also another thought in my head on beans is Phytophthora loves this wet, and there are some beans that are, you'll see a dead plant here or there, and you split, it's Phytophthora. So just a FYI that we need to be, now's the time of year that things start changing really fast from certain diseases.
You have anything to add on that, Derek?
No, I mean, I think you guys are nailing it there on really good points with the late season disease and things like that. But back to your nutrition discussion and things like that, and sulfur and additional nitrogen in corn this year, I think is is going to be important. I think a lot of that stuff and those management practices are really going to start to become evident here as we get later. Rodney mentioned the senescence in beans and things like that. I think where we did, our goal is to keep a healthier plant. We want that plant to stay healthy as long as possible, to extend our grain fill period and maximize its potential. And I think where we did whether it's additional nitrogen, sulfur, even fungicide, things like that to hold back these late season diseases. I think we're going to start seeing those impacts as we start to senesce in both crops. And it's going to show on how long they continue to fill grain type deal.
Well, I think that's a great lead in, Derek, into next time you're talking about management decisions that we've made in terms of fertility. I think that's a good lead in. Next time, I think we may start broaching that topic of fall fertilizer and a lot of chatter about prices, et cetera. So maybe how do we plan out this fall? We can start hitting on that along with maybe some late season type things we need to think about. But thanks, guys, very much for your time here. Thank you to everyone who's been listening, and we look forward to seeing you again next time. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us. This podcast is brought to you by N2 Novus Knowledge. Please reach out to your N2 agronomist if we can help in any way. Join us next time for more in-depth agronomic advice.